time it feels good to be a Resident Evil content creator right now. I'm not gonna lie guys, things have been really dry on the channel because of the lack of Resident Evil content since Separate Ways released back in 2023. But thanks to the recent reveal of RE9 aka Resident Evil Requiem, we have so much to talk about and so many topics to cover in the coming weeks. And today we're taking a look at something that before recently I would have never considered the possibility of, a Resident Evil Outbreak Remake. Yeah, a week ago this may have seemed like a joke, but honestly, with the recent reveal of RE9 and the fact that Alyssa Ashcroft and her daughter, Grace, appears to be a vital part in the story of RE9, yeah, the chances of us getting a Resident Evil Outbreak Remake has never been better. So strap in Resident Evil nerds as we take it right back into the past as we consider why a Resident Evil Outbreak Remake makes sense, what we can expect in a remake if it were to happen, and what changes can and should Capcom make to the potential Outbreak Remake. Before that though, consider hitting that subscribe button at the end of today's video if you felt like I earned it, as well as dropping a like on today's video if you enjoyed this topic. But with that out of the way, let's jump straight into
Resident Evil Outbreak.
We should first talk about the original game in question for those of you that have never played or heard of Resident Evil Outbreak. If you're one of those people and you don't want to hear me talk about what is Outbreak, feel free to skip to the next section in the video as I have the timestamps down below in the description of today's video. If you are one of those people that haven't played or heard of this game, don't feel bad. Resident Evil Outbreak Files number 1 and 2 were two underappreciated online co-op survival horror games that were available on the PlayStation 2. Since then, there's actually no way to play Resident Evil Outbreak except via emulation on PC. Going back to those original games, this spin-off series set in Raccoon City was supposed to be a single game before Capcom decided to break it up into 3 parts, Outbreak Files number 1, 2, and 3. Unfortunately, due to the failure of the second Outbreak game and the success of RE4 that same year, Capcom canceled the third Outbreak game and we were just left with the 2. Anyway, these games focus on a handful of survivors caught in the middle of the outbreak in Raccoon City during the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Players can play with up to 3 friends online with a choice of 8 different survivors to choose from. Just to name a few, you had Kevin, one of RPD's finest, Mark, a veteran turned security guard, and the most important character now courtesy of RE9's reveal, Alyssa Ashcroft, a reporter for the Raccoon Press in Raccoon City. Outside of unique dialogue options, each of these characters had their pros and cons in terms of what they brought to the table. For example, Alyssa was a master of unlocking courtesy of her lockpick. Take that, Jill. Anyway, each of the 2 games are split into 5 scenarios, bringing the grand total of scenarios to 10 between both games. These scenarios focus on different locations in Raccoon City, from the Raccoon City Zoo to an apartment building that's on fire. They also feature unique infected creatures that we don't see in other entries to the franchise, like a zombie elephant and a suspended, the latter being a zombie that has slowly begun to mutate into a licker. Basically, every scenario has the same objective: escape Raccoon City while also helping survivors along the way. Despite this simple premise and a story that was almost non-existent, the Outbreak games were a lot of fun for one reason in particular: the fact that this game was a true survival horror online co-op game before online co-op was a thing. As I mentioned earlier, the Outbreak games released on the PlayStation 2, which put it on a console that was one generation too early in terms of the rise of popularity for online multiplayer games. Unfortunately, because the Outbreak games were a generation too early, these games didn't really live up to their full potential. However, the Outbreak games excelled as a multiplayer co-op survival horror game, which is still something that I think most developers try and fail to do, even Capcom. Looking at every single co-op Resident Evil game post Resident Evil Outbreak, none of them feels like a true survival horror experience. RE5 and RE6 leans heavily into action horror, with action being the focus. Games like Operation Raccoon City and Umbrella Corps drops the horror elements completely, and even Resident Evil Resistance, a bonus game that I actually personally really enjoyed, is more of an asymmetrical horror game instead of survival horror. Even 2 decades later, the Outbreak games are still the only Resident Evil games to have mastered the survival horror co-op experience, and it's kind of funny that those games haven't been revisited sooner, considering that Capcom constantly has been chasing a live service Resident Evil game for as long as I can remember. Yet, funny enough, the answer was right in front of them in their own catalog of past and forgotten Resident Evil games in the form of the Outbreak games. With the breakdown of what the Outbreak games are out of the way, let's turn our attention to why now makes the most sense for Capcom to revisit this spin-off mini-series within the universe of Resident Evil. As I stated earlier, RE9's big reveal at Summer Game Fest showed us that one of the main characters of the game will be Grace Ashcroft. This is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, the reporter that I mentioned earlier, who was one of the survivors of the Outbreak games. On top of that, portions of the trailer hinted the fact that Alyssa might have playable sections in the form of flashback sequences in Resident Evil 9. Now, while most of these sequences point towards the flashbacks being of Alyssa during her final days while investigating Redwood Hotel, I believe there's a small possibility that we could also see flashbacks of her time in Raccoon City during the Outbreak games. Again, this is all just speculation and I'm probably grasping at straws here, but hear me out. First, we see this terrifying creature crawl down the walls of a dark hallway. The way it moves appears to be blind and it uses its sense of hearing to move around the hallway. Now, a lot of people have pointed that this could possibly be Lisa Trevor because of the chains and the sound that the chains make kind of remind them of her, but personally I get major Suspended vibes from it, which as I stated earlier is a creature that appears in the Outbreak games. And this location reminds me of a hallway inside of the same apartment building that the Outbreak survivors fought the Suspended. We also see a zombie cop, which again could be a flashback to Outbreak. Again, these are very unlikely guesses, but I just wanted to point them out. Anyway, if RE9 does feature any flashback sequences of Outbreak, then it sets the stage for Capcom to begin preparing an Outbreak remake on the RE engine by reusing assets to give us Alyssa's origin story once again. Another reason why this makes sense is because Capcom is now without a live service Resident Evil game. With the failure of Umbrella Corps, no further updates to Resistance, and now the official announcement to close the servers for Reverse, there is a space for yet another live service or multiplayer online co-op Resident Evil game. And I've been saying this for years, as I'm sure other creators have been too, but if Capcom really wants an online multiplayer Resident Evil game to succeed, just give us Outbreak again. It's an instant moneymaker, and with RE9 to essentially help promote the story of Outbreak now, there's really no better time than to give us this remake or even a remaster complete with dedicated servers. Currently, the Outbreak games are not playable on any platform except for PlayStation 2 and PC via emulation. In fact, there is a fan server for the Outbreak games on PC that allows you to play online with people today, and it's actually, unsurprisingly, a lot of fun. So this is proof right there that an Outbreak remake with dedicated servers can finally fill that gap that Capcom has been trying to fill within the Resident Evil franchise. So the final thing that I want to talk about in today's video deals with the things I would like to see changed and improved on if we did indeed get a Outbreak remake. Obviously, improved visuals, voice lines, etc. are all no-brainers. However, there's a few mechanics and features that definitely need to be changed for a modern take on the Outbreak games, and a few things that have to stay the same. First off, don't you dare get rid of that infection rate. I absolutely love the mechanic in the original Outbreak games, and while we're on the topic, they better keep that mechanic of letting you play as a zombie when your infection rate hits 100%. Seriously, chasing after my friends after I died was some of the most fun I had with the original games. Also, I really like the scenario system instead of one giant story, or at least for the multiplayer side of things. This format means that you can play through multiple different locations within Raccoon City without having to worry about keeping the story consistent, essentially allowing us to replay each scenario with friends in different ways. I also like this method because if the game does do well, they can continue to add new locations, aka scenarios, and future updates to the game, therefore giving Capcom that live service multiplayer experience that they've been wanting to do with the Resident Evil IP. And I'll be real with you guys, I'm not normally big on the whole live service approach, but if any game can be done right using this format, a Resident Evil Outbreak remake is definitely that game. However, if Capcom really wants to have a small story to tie in with the story of Resident Evil 9, then I think the best way to go about that is to have a short yet satisfying campaign mode that focuses primarily on the story and gives us that Resident Evil 3 remake that we should have received, and just have a multiplayer mode that allows us to play through different scenarios with friends in different locations, both in the main campaign and additional locations as a bonus game for Outbreak. That way they get the best of both worlds with this entry, a game that ties into Resident Evil 9 in terms of the canon story and that live service multiplayer experience that they've been chasing for years. I don't know guys, let me know what you would want in your dream scenario of a Resident Evil Outbreak remake. Also, do you guys think RE9 potentially sets the stage for us to finally get a remake or remaster of this game on modern consoles? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.